And even if he does land his best shot at the moment, not that much is going to happen.
And it almost, oh, there's a left hook. Oh, the hand! Down goes Paul!
5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
For the last several years, the internet has been running a strange social experiment, whether people want to admit it or not. An experiment where influence, controversy, and spectacle slowly creep into spaces that were once reserved only for elite professionals, and nowhere has that experiment been more obvious than in boxing, because boxing, more than almost any other sport, lives at the intersection of ego, violence, and fame, and that's exactly why someone like Jake Paul was able to force his way in. Jake Paul didn't arrive in boxing because the sport needed him. He arrived because attention did. He understood something very early on that purists hated but promoters quietly respected. Modern boxing survives on eyes, not honor. Pay-per-view buys don't care about legacy. They care about curiosity. And Jake Paul became the most curious figure in combat sports almost overnight. People tuned in not because they believed in him, but because they wanted to see if he'd finally be exposed.
Prediction for the fight, Logan?
It'll be a knockout for sure. Obviously, I'm saying a Jake Paul knockout, and I don't see this fight going more than 3 rounds, bro.
At first, it was easy to dismiss. YouTubers, retired MMA fighters, athletes far removed from their primes. Critics said the same thing every time. This isn't real boxing, and in many ways, they weren't wrong. But here's what they missed. Jake kept winning. Not always cleanly, not always convincingly, but consistently enough that the conversation slowly shifted from "this is fake" to "how far can this actually go?" And that question is dangerous because eventually it demands an answer. Jake Paul trained seriously. That part is no longer debatable. World-class gyms, real coaches, professional sparring partners. He wasn't playing boxer anymore. He was becoming one. Still limited, still flawed, but undeniably improved. And as his confidence grew, so did his ambition. Every fight had to be bigger than the last. Every opponent had to silence critics a little more. That's how we ended up here. The moment Jake Paul agreed to step into the ring with Anthony Joshua, everything changed. This wasn't a test anymore. This was a reckoning. Anthony Joshua isn't just another name. He's a former unified heavyweight champion, an Olympic gold medalist, a man who has shared the ring with the most dangerous fighters on the planet. He represents the very thing Jake Paul had been circling around but never fully confronting: elite heavyweight boxing. The size difference alone told a story. Joshua isn't just taller or heavier, he's built for damage. His punches aren't flashy, they're destructive. They end careers. And from the moment the fight was announced, even Jake's most loyal supporters knew this wasn't business as usual. This wasn't a what if, this was a how bad. Still, Jake leaned into the moment the only way he knows how. The build-up was loud, the trash talk was relentless. The theatrics were dialed all the way up. Because if Jake Paul has mastered anything, it's controlling the narrative before the bell rings. He wanted this to feel like another spectacle, another chapter in the influencer boxing saga. But Anthony Joshua never played along. At press conferences, Joshua was calm, focused, almost dismissive. Not in an arrogant way, but in a professional one. He didn't need to sell the fight. He didn't need to insult Jake. He knew what this was, a job. And when the cameras shut off, that mindset mattered far more than anything said online. By fight night, the tension felt different. The crowd wasn't laughing, they weren't ironic. They were waiting to see if the experiment finally hit its limit, waiting to see if clout could survive contact with real power. And when the bell rang, it became immediately clear that this was not going to look like any Jake Paul fight we'd seen before.
But I think Jake fought a very, how do I survive long enough to land a right hand type of fight? And it made it a little difficult for AJ to get his timing. No excuses. AJ didn't look great. I'll be honest. He didn't look great. He didn't look like, an AJ we thought we were going to get, the marauder, the guy that was going to come forward and bang out Jake in one round. Pause.
From the opening seconds, Jake was on the back foot. Not strategically, but instinctively. Joshua controlled the ring with minimal effort, cutting angles, applying pressure, forcing Jake to react instead of initiate. Every movement Jake made felt defensive, every exchange felt borrowed, and that's when reality began to creep in. As the rounds progressed, it became painfully obvious that Jake Paul wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to survive, and that distinction matters more than people realize. Winning a boxing match requires intention. Surviving one requires instinct. Jake's instincts kicked in almost immediately, and they weren't the instincts of a predator. They were the instincts of someone who had suddenly realized the gap between preparation and reality. Anthony Joshua didn't rush. He didn't overcommit. He didn't try to end the fight early, even though the power difference was apparent from the first clean exchange. Instead, Joshua did what elite heavyweights do when they know time is on their side. He measured Jake, he tested reactions, he touched him just enough to establish dominance without exposing himself to unnecessary risk. Every jab from Joshua felt like a warning shot. Not a message meant to knock Jake out, but one designed to say, "You don't belong at this range." And Jake felt it. You could see it in his footwork, which became frantic. You could see it in the way he circled wide instead of stepping in with confidence. This wasn't calculated movement. This was evasion. And here's the uncomfortable truth that fans don't like to admit. Evasion only works until it doesn't. You can't run forever in a boxing ring, especially against someone who understands distance as well as Joshua does. The ring gets smaller every second you're under pressure, even if your feet are still moving. Jake did land punches. That part deserves to be said because pretending otherwise would be dishonest. He clipped Joshua a few times. He touched him cleanly in moments where the crowd gasped, briefly wondering if maybe, just maybe, something unexpected could happen. But those moments were fleeting. Joshua absorbed them without panic, without disruption, without consequence. Heavyweights of that caliber don't react the way influencers expect them to. Jake, on the other hand, reacted to everything. A blocked shot slowed him down. A glancing counter forced him to reset. A missed punch left him off balance. Every mistake compounded the next. And by the middle rounds, the difference between them wasn't just physical anymore, it was psychological. Joshua was comfortable. Jake was exhausted. One of the most telling aspects of the fight wasn't any single punch, but Jake's body language. He dropped to a knee more than once, sometimes after questionable contact, sometimes after exchanges that didn't seem fight-ending. Whether those moments were legitimate or tactical doesn't even matter anymore. What mattered was the pattern. Jake was buying time, buying oxygen, buying a few extra seconds before having to stand in front of Joshua again. That's not a criticism, it's a survival mechanism. But fans didn't tune in to watch survival, they tuned in to watch consequences. And those consequences arrived. When Joshua finally decided to turn the pressure up, it didn't come as a wild flurry or a reckless charge. It came methodically. He began stepping in behind combinations instead of single shots. He stopped letting Jake circle freely. He forced exchanges near the ropes. That's where fights end, not in the center of the ring, but in the places you can't escape. Jake tried to compensate with theatrics, tongue out, smirks, taunts, the same psychological games that had worked on lesser opponents. But those tactics only work when your opponent is emotionally invested. Joshua wasn't. He wasn't angry, he wasn't flustered, he was patient, and patience paired with power is terrifying. Then came the moment everyone remembers. The punch itself wasn't flashy, it wasn't cinematic, it was efficient. A straight shot delivered with full body mechanics, landing flush enough to rearrange Jake's expression in real time. His head snapped back, his legs betrayed him, and for a split second, the entire arena held its breath. Jake didn't go fully unconscious, which almost made it worse. He was aware enough to feel everything, but compromised enough to know he was in danger. His chin, to his credit, held up better than many expected. Lesser fighters would have folded completely, but durability doesn't equal dominance. Sometimes it just prolongs the inevitable. From that point on, the fight belonged entirely to Joshua. Jake clung. He stumbled. He leaned. He did everything except assert himself offensively. It looked less like a contest and more like a demonstration of hierarchy. This is what happens when internet fame collides with elite-level violence. The algorithm doesn't matter anymore. The comments don't matter. The cameras don't matter. Only the person in front of you does. After the final bell, the physical damage was undeniable. Reports of a broken jaw circulated almost immediately, accompanied by images and scans that confirmed just how much punishment Jake had taken.
In my opinion, he won 4 of them. People argue that he at least won 3. No one expected him to last that long. Rolled his ankle, broke his jaw, still fucking fighting, man. Like, that's toughness. You know, most people wouldn't have the balls ever to step in a boxing ring in their life. He stepped in a boxing ring with one of the baddest men on the planet. Who's 40 pounds heavier than him and 6 inches taller.
And yet, even in defeat, Jake did what Jake always does. He tweeted, he challenged, he reframed the loss as fuel for the next chapter. That's where the conversation becomes more complicated. Because while Jake Paul lost decisively, he didn't disappear, he didn't quit, he didn't crumble publicly, and that matters, whether people like him or not. He stepped into a situation most would never dare to enter. He faced a level of opposition that exposed his limitations in brutal clarity, and somehow he walked out conscious. The audience got what it wanted. Not a fairy tale, not a viral upset, but truth. A truth that had been postponed for years. Jake Paul is not an elite heavyweight boxer, but he is also not a fraud pretending to be one. He's something more uncomfortable, a serious amateur who pushed his luck too far and finally found the ceiling. And ceilings once hit forced decisions. Now that the dust has settled, this fight forces an uncomfortable conversation that a lot of people have been avoiding for years. Not just about Jake Paul, but about what influencer boxing actually is. And what it can never be. Because this wasn't just a loss on Jake's record. This was a boundary being enforced in real time. For a long time, Jake lived in the grey area between entertainment and sport. That grey area is where he thrived. He could always argue that he was still learning, still evolving, still climbing. And to be fair, that argument wasn't entirely wrong. He did improve. He did take the training seriously. He did risk his image every time he stepped into the ring. But boxing, especially heavyweight boxing, does not reward ambition alone. It rewards mastery, and mastery takes decades. Anthony Joshua didn't win this fight because he wanted it more. He didn't win it because he talked better or trained harder in one camp. He won it because he has lived in that world for most of his life. He understands timing, danger, and consequence at a level Jake simply hasn't had time to reach, and likely never will. That doesn't make Jake a failure, it makes him human. The real question now is what happens next, because this is the point where many influencer careers collapse. This is where denial sets in, excuses pile up, and credibility evaporates. Jake has two possible paths, and both are risky in different ways. The first path is humility, acknowledging that elite heavyweight boxing is beyond his reach and pivoting back toward competitive but realistic matchups. Fights that test him without endangering his long-term health. Rematches, crossovers, story-driven bouts where the outcome isn't predetermined by physics alone. That path keeps him relevant, respected, and marketable. The second path is ego, chasing bigger names, louder callouts, pretending that one brutal loss didn't expose a fundamental gap. That path leads to more damage, faster decline, and a legacy defined by stubbornness instead of growth. And here's the thing people don't want to admit. Jake Paul is smart enough to know this. The image he projects might be reckless, but behind the scenes, he understands branding, longevity, and narrative better than almost anyone in this space. He knows that surviving Anthony Joshua doesn't mean he belongs there. It means he escaped with enough credibility to choose wisely. For Anthony Joshua, this fight was never about proving himself. His legacy was written long before Jake Paul entered a boxing gym. This was about reasserting reality, about reminding audiences what elite heavyweight power actually looks like. And in that sense, Joshua did exactly what he needed to do. He showed discipline, he showed control, and he walked away without chaos or controversy. This fight will be remembered as a turning point, not because it was shocking, but because it was clarifying. The influencer boxing era didn't end here, but it grew up. It met resistance, it learned its limits. And Jake Paul, whether people like him or not, played a role in that evolution. He forced the sport to confront modern fame. He forced critics to articulate their standards. And finally, he forced himself to face something he couldn't outmarket, outtroll, or outhype. That matters, because history doesn't just remember winners, it remembers moments, and this moment will be replayed, debated, clipped, and referenced for years. Not as a joke, not as a meme, but as the night the experiment finally hit reality head-on. So whether you came to laugh, to hate watch, or to genuinely analyze the sport, this fight gave you something rare: honesty. No spin, no controversy, just a clear answer to a question that had been building for years. And now the story continues, just on different terms. So what do you think? Did Jake Paul earn respect by stepping into the ring, or did he push the experiment too far? Where should he go next? And should influencer boxing keep raising the stakes, or slow things down before someone gets seriously hurt? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into influencer culture, combat sports, and the moments where hype collides with reality. I'll see you in the next one.